Just before we start, actually, just as an example of our credentials, I just want to show that the book that we're using today for this show is. You see that? So
yeah,
book of inside information. So you're going to get it all here, all of the inside information from this book that I wrote, actually. Anyway, yeah. So what's been going on the past? I haven't been around for the past couple of days or past couple of years, actually. So I was wondering. I heard there's some guy called Trump, and people don't like him. He's a threat to democracy. And then there was a coup, and Hugo Chavez is president of America now. Is that what it is?
Hugo Chavez was involved in the coup. I believe
But is he the president of America now?
The story I heard is that Hugo Chavez came back from the grave and stole the election from Trump.
Right.
And gave it to Joe Biden, Joe Biden is now called Beijing Biden.
Beijing Biden, right. And
he's working at the behest of the Communist Chinese Party, the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP.
The Chi-Coms.
The Chi-Coms.
Right.
That's the new term.
Right.
Yeah, we got to get up to speed on your terms.
Chi-Coms, okay, I got
the Chi-Coms in league with Cuban doctors and Hugo Chavez.
Q, did you say Q?
Q's involved as well.
Is that...
He's a good hat though.
No, but is he Q? Is that why he's called Q? Because Cuban? No, I probably got that wrong. I haven't been keeping up with things, but I know Q's a big player.
There's probably some relation. There always is. Right. Anything that's Q, if you come across the letter or the pronunciation Q, it just assume there's a connection.
Right, I'll do that. Right.
So, in fact, you might even check your book of inside sources. It's
probably
might be there listed on the Q.
Yeah, definitely. I'd say so. Q. So what? Speaking more seriously, what actually? What are we looking at the past few days? I am seeing headlines talking about a coup, insurrection. It struck me as the funniest looking coup and insurrection that I've really ever seen. And I've seen quite a few of them. I televised over the past 20 some years, and I've read about a lot of others over the decades before that. A lot of them carried out by the CIA. One that I witnessed more or less and looked into quite deeply back in 2014 in Ukraine. A kind of a regime change in Ukraine, and that was like 100 days, 3 months plus of mass riots, violence, hundreds of people killed, buildings wrecked and stuff. And this has been called a coup as well. Now that happened in one day, in a few hours in Washington D.C. That was a coup. So it just doesn't seem like it fits the bill for me anyway. I know it fits the bill for CNN, but it doesn't seem to fit the bill for me that it was a coup, that a coup actually took place. It's
so farcical that a regime critic, let's say, I won't name it a name, but he's kind of a known analyst, thinking that he was pointing out the farce, joked quasi-seriously that this is the first time there's been a coup, to use the media's term, where it was done to keep the regime.
Right,
so you would have to believe, you'd have to believe a couple of things at the same time. One, that there was an attempt to coup, but that it was in reverse. It was to keep the regime that you don't like, something like that.
Right.
So that's part of the farce, because both sides in the United States are using the same language to describe what the other side is doing. So it's like it's been said throughout 2020 with the COVID, there's two realities here, and I can understand why it's unbelievably confusing if you've not spent a lot of time, if you don't have the time to keep your eye to the ground, your ear to the ground rather, and to keep an eye on things and to parse one thing from the other. They're both right and they're wrong. I just use the media generally. The media depiction is that at the very death of the 11th hour of Trump's administration, he's attempted to subvert democracy with raising a mob, storming the Capitol, and it was to somehow in this case, retain power for another 4 years for Trump.
Yeah.
But
it didn't really. Well, it didn't work out.
I don't even think that's. They don't even believe that themselves. I don't even think
But they're saying...
And never Trumper, if you sit him or her down, can really believe... Because what could have come from that politically?
Right. So you're saying that most people don't believe what the media is saying, like the likes of CNN and MSNBC and stuff. Most people probably don't believe when they say that this was a coup, an insurrection, an attempted, overthrow of democracy. Who knows? They don't necessarily go into details of what was planned, but that it had all the hallmarks of a potential overthrow of a sitting government in America, right? They seem to be talking about it in those terms and stuff, but it doesn't really seem to it doesn't fit that bill, and so I think most people probably would assume or accept that the media is not telling the truth. They're exaggerating the situation.
Yes, in political terms, but they can accept, because they never liked Trump. Those who didn't, right, detest him. They can accept that this was a mob or a rabble,
right,
and potentially dangerous. In fact, they'd be happy. CNN can now use the term fascist and have the images to back it up. And those who are already believing that Trump is to be removed, let's get rid of him, he should be gone, or let's vote him out legally or illegally, whatever, then they'll see that they can accept that it was a coup insofar as it was something against due process, against civilization.
Right.
But I don't think anyone's seriously considering that this was a real attempt.
No.
To do anything like what could have happened? They go in and then they say we're in charge now.
Yeah,
it's
your man with the horns and the shaman guy with the horns. He was going to be president.
Everyone's laughing at
President Camacho, he's going to be new president or something. I mean, how is that going to happen? It's such nonsense. Yeah, I mean, there's a video, Scotty, you can pull up first there on from, I think it's on Twitter, from of a mob, the fascist mob storming Congress. Yeah, that one right there. If you expand, I don't know, expand it or keep it whatever size. Yeah, just play it, and let's see. This is in front of the.
Fucking traitors! Fucking traitors!
The doors being opened there. Well, we'll see who opened them.
They're gonna lock us in.
See the cops there?
You can disagree with it, but respect it.
Cop, another cop, all standing by.
Come on.
They march on up. That's up into the hallway between the two chambers, and
are you suggesting though that they were just allowed in? And
I'm not suggesting it. That's what you see in the video.
But I've just been on CNN's homepage, and they have another video at another door somewhere, and there's a cop who's been crushed,
right?
Because the cops on the inside in riot gear are not letting them in,
right?
And they don't. There's no there's no give where they suddenly do let them in. At some entrances, they did fight.
Right,
push back.
At some entrances, the cops decided to push them back. I don't know where the video that you're talking about on CNN. I saw it, but I don't know where the people are going to or coming from. Is it these same people that the cops just let in that are further inside, or trying to get back outside, or trying to get to another part of the building, whatever? And that's when the cops stopped. And the bottom line is, there's a video there of the cops, at least some of the cops, deciding to open the doors. And you heard one of them even say, you can disagree with it, but he was kind of seemed to be saying, if you can disagree with it, but don't be wrecking the place. Don't go crazy. So there seemed to have been a general attitude, based on that, from probably a lot of the cops that were stationed around Capitol Hill and inside the building, that these people weren't really a significant threat, and to some extent they had a right, maybe, to be inside the buildings. But there's actually, I'll just an explanation for what was going on in that situation, and how the police actually responded, was given yesterday by none other than former President Barack Obama. You can see it on the screen right there, I think, in a minute. That's January 8th. For those who are wondering why so much attention has been focused on the response of the Capitol Police to the Trump-inspired riots, here's a data-driven article that provides some useful frame of reference. And the article, just the blurb of the article there below, says the police's tepid response to the Capitol breach wasn't an anomaly or something like that. Authorities are more than twice as likely to break up a left-wing protest than a right-wing protest. That's the article that Obama cites. And then an article below that, if you just scroll down, the one with the Capitol building, it's got the title, "The Capitol invaders enjoyed the privilege of not being taken seriously."
Right. White privilege.
Right. So, but this seems to be Obama's explanation as to, it's white privilege. It's obviously it's anti-Trump protest or anti-Trump pro-Trumpers who were at the Capitol yesterday. But there's a reason. He obviously doesn't explain. There's a reason why the police would have responded that way to Trump supporters as opposed to Black Lives Matter and Antifa, whatever, rioters during the summer. And that's because Black Lives Matter and Antifa tend to wreck and burn and, sometimes, very often beat people and sometimes attack them and kill them. Trump supporters don't have a history of doing that.
And they attack police stations.
Right, they attack police stations. Yeah, so I mean, it's kind of that level of obtuseness on the part of supposedly, everyone on the left's hero, Barack Obama, that just, it leads you to not really take not anything he says seriously when that's the level of his discourse, or that's the level or the seriousness of his argumentation when it's so easily taken apart that, of course, Trump supporters were not, beaten down immediately and seen as an immediate threat because there's no history among Trump supporters of wrecking the place when they don't get what they want.
Yeah,
this is the first time that they supposedly wrecked the place. But again, there was very little wrecking done the other day. You know what I mean? It was
something he might be getting at without daring to say it outright is that the vast majority of police or emergency services or military types in the United States would be Trump supporters.
Right. Which is fairly well known, I think.
Yeah, no one disputes that. But I'm not clear yet on the Capitol because we know about what happened to one of the Trump supporters who was shot in the neck and died tragically. I mean, it's on video. They haven't tried to hide that video. Everyone's probably seen it at this point. But then there are 4 other people who died. One has been named as a police officer. Do you know about the other 3?
The other 3 were civilians, and I think it was just in a kind of they had medical emergencies, or there were people with maybe some medical conditions, whatever. And in certain areas, there was an awful lot of people. There was something like maybe, I don't know the exact numbers, but certainly at Trump's rally, there was like upwards of 50,000, 50 to 100,000 people or whatever attended that rally, or maybe more. And then a certain number of them decided to march over a few streets over to the Capitol on Trump's instructions. You have to allow for the fact that they were listening to him. He basically said that they should go over and support what was going on inside, because obviously, as we know, they went over right at the time when the debates were happening, or the debates on the objections to the Electoral College certification process.
He explicitly encouraged them to go over
and stand outside, and it's just it's an understandable thing to do, right? Because it happens all the time. It has happened a lot throughout modern history where. If some significant event is happening, some significant political event is happening in a political building or a parliament or government building, a lot of people will congregate outside and either protest or encourage or whatever. They'll basically try to make their voices heard to the people inside, right? That's the best in that situation those people can do, which is to let the people inside who are making decisions on the future or that are very important to the people outside, the best they can do is like create a bit of a ruckus outside, not just sit at home and watch TV, but actually go down and let the people inside know we're outside, so make the right decision. And I think that was Trump's intention. What he intended, right? Not that they would get inside the building necessarily. And I think after the fact, he made it clear that was a bad idea. They shouldn't have done that, and he never encouraged it. But they did it. But it was always a possibility. And certainly the people who decided to go inside to bang on the doors and get in, or the police who let them in, I mean, they're complicit in that for letting them in, right? But it was, and I'm not saying there were a bunch of, you know, Asian provocateurs who got inside or whatever. Maybe some of them were. Some of them had a particular agenda to get inside. There's also video I've seen of people trying to break windows and being grabbed by the rest of the crowd and pulled away and told to stop. Like doing the kind of Black Lives Matter, Antifa kind of maneuver, which is, you know, cause a bit of destruction. A lot of the crowd didn't want that to happen because...
You see that at left-wing protests too, where they call out the black bloc types.
Right.
And they even go and physically stop them.
Right. So
and throw them back into police lines, you know, get rid of them.
Right. So that's a perpetual danger in any of these kind of mass gatherings or protests, is you're going to have either police, Asian provocateurs in there attempting to change the dynamic and make the protest look bad, right? It's an issue, or it's a tactic that's as old as, well, politics, let's say.
How likely was it ever that, I mean, he called the rally a week before. I remember Trump tweeting about it. Come to Washington January 6th. I've heard some much higher estimates of how many turned up.
Yeah.
Obviously, both sides will want to inflate the numbers. It doesn't really matter because we know, everyone can agree for a fact that, for argument's sake, half the population of the United States voted for Trump. Mm-hmm. Officially, it's less because somehow Biden's supposed to have won by a lot more. But okay, whatever. Half the country supports Trump. So whether they turned up or not, it's well known in the 2 months of antagonism and wrangling over fraudulent elections that the country's pissed off, or half of it is. So to what extent is encouraging a rally for what would otherwise just have been a formality? Pence gets up there and the session starts and they just go through state by state alphabetically. Okay, approved, next. Could it have changed anything? Or to ask the flip side of that question, was Trump's last chance blown by the fact that violence occurred and people were killed?
No. I'm pretty sure, based on all of my, you know, research and looking into the situation, that Trump was not going to win. It was pretty clear, I think, probably whenever the Supreme Court kicked out the case that Texas brought on spurious no standing. Yeah. On the basis of no standing, which was like, I mean, the analogy I used, they threw it out or didn't look at it on the basis of no standing, and their no standing was that Texas didn't have any standing to interfere with or dictate to Pennsylvania on how they run their elections, that each state gets to run their elections their own way. So Texas has had no case, so kick it out. And it's like, but that was like, hang on a minute, that was just a preamble to what the main point we wanted to make, the main part of the case, which was that because Pennsylvania wasn't running their elections properly, that possibly changed the outcome of the election, and therefore all the people who voted for Trump in Texas are injured parties in that respect. They were defrauded, or they were denied the legitimacy, or their vote and what they voted for was denied in an illegal way, possibly illegal way. It's kind of like the analogy I used is that if something's stolen from your house and you have video evidence of your neighbour crossing the road towards your house and up to your gate on the day that the item from your house was stolen, and then you have other evidence from inside the house, let's say of your neighbour inside the house, whatever, and you take that to the judge and you show the judge the first part of the video of, Your Honour, on the day that this item was stolen from my house, here's my neighbour crossing the road, and the judge says, I'll have to stop you there. I can't hear this case because you have no right to say whether or not your neighbour crosses the road.
Exactly, yeah.
And it's kicked out.
Yeah.
And you go, but hang on a minute, that you know, that's not my claim. That's just part of my claim. It's the lead into the meat of my case. Sorry, dismissed. When the Supreme Court did that, yeah, you could tell, and this was amongst 5 to 9 at least, 5 of 9 supposedly Republican judges appointed, 3 of them appointed by Trump, or maybe 6 to 9, I think it actually was. When you see that level of non-participation in Trumpism or the Trump train, at that level where you expect them at least to be, sympathetic to the case and to Trump's claims. When you see that they're not part of it, you know that they're part of the system first and foremost. They're not Republican or Democrat. They're part of the system, and in dismissing that case, they're defending the system, the democratic system, not necessarily the democratic system, but the system. Well, you can call it the democratic system, but they're defending the establishment that doesn't really care much about democracy and knows that presidential elections aren't really of any great import. They're just an opportunity for people in America to get to feel like they have there's a participatory democracy in process, and they get to choose one face or another face from two of the established parties. But who gets picked doesn't matter because they're both from the establishment, and nothing changes. And for most of, for certainly since JFK, I would say all presidential administrations in the US were largely ceremonial positions in the sense that they simply fulfilled the policy of the so-called, or the quote-unquote deep state that runs the country from behind the scenes. This interagency group that is made up of career politicians,
permanent bureaucrats,
intel agency types and stuff. And so it doesn't matter for them, that who gets picked or which president is picked, or hasn't mattered for a long time. And you don't get to expose that. People who are part of that establishment are going to push back against any attempt to expose that's the case, and to bring the whole thing into disrepute by allowing evidence of fraud, widespread, and very specific and very detailed. A very specific attempt by members of that establishment, let's say, we can assume, to actually commit fraud. Because you do that, then the whole thing falls down, because you have to look at who was involved, how did it happen, who conspired to commit the fraud, and all that kind of stuff. So,
and people finally have to go to jail, which for the last 4 years, no one has gone to jail. When that was, one of Trump's key motto campaign slogans running in 2016,
right.
She's going to jail.
Right.
And they kept up that kind of message, but we've seen nobody is accountable in the United States, except maybe we'll see now Donald Trump.
Right. But the only reason he's accountable is because he's not part of the establishment, and wasn't it? No one can disagree with the fact that he was not a part of the Washington establishment types. Right? He came out of business, out of left field. Sure, he was in the periphery, but he certainly wasn't. He didn't know how the system works, the way I kind of just described it. There is in effect a deep state, and this has been talked about in the mainstream media, like sparsely over the years. But it's mainstream media reports or articles have talked about that there is this system or this group of career bureaucrats or intel operatives who run the country, despite which administration, regardless of whether or not what administration comes along, and each administration just plays ball with them.
Yeah.
And Trump, the fact that Trump wasn't an insider or wasn't a Washington establishment type person, was made clear at the very beginning of his presidency, well, even before when they started attacking him, but all throughout his administration, the way they attacked him. But the reason they started really attacking him in earnest was because right from the beginning, shortly after he was inaugurated in January 2017, he said he was given one of the first things he was notified about was these daily intelligence briefings that he was meant to receive and look at and use to inform himself and his policy, let's say. Basically, it was policy being handed to him for him to simply read out or to follow. And he decided publicly, it was reported, it wasn't said by him specifically, but insiders said that this happened, that he simply said, I don't need to look at those. I don't need those intelligence briefings. I'll work it out myself. He took that attitude of, so I'm the president now, and that makes me commander-in-chief, right? That means I make decisions and stuff, right? So he took it literally when he would have understood if he had been a Washington establishment type. He would have understood that the way it works, because he would have been within those circles for a long time beforehand, but he wasn't. So he decided to take it literally. I'm the commander-in-chief. I'm going to make decisions. I don't need any intelligence briefings. Well, he can give them to me, but I'm not going to necessarily follow them. And then Chuck Schumer was on, what do you call her?
Rachel Maddow
show.
Yeah.
And he responded to this, that Trump doing that, and said that Trump is walking a dangerous line by doing that, because when you piss off the intelligence agencies, they have 6 ways from Sunday
To get back at
to get back at you. And then that launched into
And he didn't mean it as a threat
the
necessarily.
PP dossier. No, well, he did, I think.
Partly,
he was
but
stating the
he's
fact.
speaking from experience because
Right.
he knows how
Right.
it works.
So if he was president, he would know not to reject those daily intelligence briefings, because he knows he'd be screwed by the intel agencies, who the FBI, CIA, NSA, all of them.
The alphabet soup.
Yeah, basically that they have their fingers on all of the pies, and if they want to get at you, they'll get at you. And then we saw exactly what happened. What he meant by 6 ways from Sunday of getting back at it was Russian collusion, the dodgy dossier, the PP gate, whatever stories, all the bullshit, basically.
The impeachment attempt.
Leading up to an investigation by Mueller over
for
a year, and then the attempt to impeach over Ukraine. I mean, that right there is how those people operate, and it's interesting. It's how the same kind of people operated in, for example, I called it, or a few other people I think were calling it, a dodgy dossier, specifically because that term dodgy dossier goes back to 2003, when the US and the UK, same types of people who concocted this dodgy dossier on Trump, concocted a dodgy dossier on Saddam's weapons of mass destruction that was used to justify the US and British invasion of Iraq. So there's a fingerprint, a very clear fingerprint there of these types of people and how they go about it,
Yeah.
And those are the people who run the show in the
And
US.
the thing they have in common is that real policy, real decisions, when it comes down to it, are made outside of visible public channels.
Right.
And then they're presented, and then it's up to you, the politicians, to fix the facts around the policy we've decided elsewhere.
Right.
So, no one should be surprised by this, but it's remarkable. You've remarked as well, when we've talked about this in the past, that there's a naivety, in this context, to Americans in general, but even to someone like Trump. He did say at one point, a year or so into his term, that, I knew this was going to be hard, but I didn't know it was going to be this hard.
Yeah, well, there you go. You should have known. I mean, we knew. We would. I mean, that's the weird thing, is that having done the kind of research and looked into the whole setup of Western government and geopolitics and domestic politics, and having watched it over the past 20 or 30 years, we have a fairly good idea of the kind of people that run the show, what their nature is, what their intentions are. And if you were ever in a position where you were up against them, you would have to really think very carefully about your moves, But Trump apparently didn't have that depth of knowledge and understanding. But he did have...
He had some successes, no?
He had a bloody-minded, personality in a certain sense, to just blunder on through and say, screw you, I'm going to do it anyway, and carry on with a lot
But
of
maybe
people
that's the only... This is the horrible thing. Maybe that's the only kind of personality that ever stood a chance.
Of course.
And if that was the best available, it failed still, because
absolutely.
that is how powerful and
right.
depraved and capable.
Right, that system is, yeah. That establishment, those establishment types are, yeah. They are very well entrenched. They are the rulers, the ones who... They are the commanders in chief, and have been for a very long time, and there's no way anybody's going to come along and unseat them. But getting back to the point, yeah. So it was obvious whenever the Supreme Court kicked out that the Texas claim against Pennsylvania for fraud, it was obvious that Trump didn't stand a chance, right? Who else was he going to go to? He indirectly had gone to the Supreme Court, and they had just tossed it, said no. And the end result is no one ever looked at no official authority or body looked at the allegations of vote fraud. And made any decision on them, made any ruling on them. It was trial by media, and the media dismissed it as more Trump lies, more Trump nonsense. It's all, just make believe.
For Trump supporters, it was excruciating, because it's been 2 months of, okay, they shut the door on us here, but there's other possibilities. We were doing it too. We were trying to calculate the pathways to a potential airing of grievance investigation. Yeah. Or constitutional means, whatever. So, okay, they shut us here. Okay, well, there's always this.
Yeah.
Oh, they shut it there.
It got more and more desperate as it went
Okay, so
along.
what about... Oh, let's hold on. No one... Christmas is coming. It doesn't matter. We can wait till January 6th, and then there's a build to January 6th. And then, we didn't expect that. at all. Maybe we should have.
I didn't expect the storming of the Capitol.
The headlines, the framing of it was, I mean, these people are hyperbole. They have no shame when it comes to it. But the darkest day in American democracy, the darkest day in American democracy.
But you know what? You haven't had
in
too many dark
270
days.
years. They haven't had many, right?
Well, they haven't had very many dark days or any really dark days.
On the soil.
If that's a dark day. They don't know what a dark day is, like, basically, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Your first blink when the news broke, I remember your first blink was, Jesus, this is a result of that whole Q thing. What did you mean by that? What were you getting at?
Well, from the very beginning, like, which was I don't know, how long's Q going around? 3 years, maybe? From the beginning, more or less?
Yeah.
Right? It was like Q is some insider within, the military intelligence or something. It's all very vague, right? By design, obviously, that keeps the speculation going, keeps the mystique going and stuff.
Sometimes it was a White House insider. Sometimes it's
someone deeper,
a friend
intel,
in the intel community.
blah blah blah, whatever, and just stoking people up and talking, talking the kind of militia type mindset up among Trump followers and stick with the plan. We've got a plan. We're going to do it. We're going to take back the country. We're going to get rid of, all kind of extremist stuff, but extremist light in a certain sense. But it provided a field day, obviously, for the media to characterize Trump supporters as deranged, nutty conspiracy theorists and stuff like that. And he never said anything of any real import. I mean, he may have the person. I'm pretty convinced it was a psyop. It was an insider. It was a Washington establishment anti-Trump psyop or anti-Trump supporter psyop to try and vector them away in a certain direction, to keep them a bit more in the more conspiracy-minded extremist camp rather than a bit more rational and straightforward, to vector them in that direction, and also to provide fodder for the media to make fun of them and laugh at them and dismiss Trump as a result, because the type of people that this Q guy, this Q fantasy is the type of guy that Trump is attracting, and the people who follow Q are the kind of people who follow Trump, i.e. they're all conspiracy theorists, But yeah, and he was pushing the militia thing, and working people up, and the end result, I think, probably that storming the section of that group of Trump supporters of the crowd of the 50, 100, 200, 300,000, whatever were there. There was a decent percentage of them who were Q fanatics, basically.
One guy for sure was.
Right, and we're taking
the horned,
the
QAnon
horned shaman,
shaman.
guy, and they take it to that step further, where they want to get into the Capitol building. You know what I mean? Where the vast majority of people who were there probably did not want to get into the Capitol building. I mean, I think you're right that there were probably about 300,000. The numbers go up to 300,000 people. So some are cut, split the difference, 200,000, whatever. The pictures you see of people around the Capitol and inside the Capitol are tiny, tiny percentage of that. The vast majority of people were not anywhere near the doors of the Capitol building. It was a small group of QAnon nut jobs who ruined it. Well, they didn't ruin it. That was your question, basically. They didn't really ruin it. It wasn't going on. They ruined it in a certain sense. They just made it worse than it already was. Trump was always going to lose because the system was not... Nobody in the system wasn't... with any power in the system was... supported him and did not like his populism. And, of course, populism has got a bad rap all these years. But what is populism other than kind of like a more direct form of democracy than the type of two-party system, the elites...
Business as usual, yeah.
But apparently that's by design and intentionally has been given bad press and in the minds of the average person. The mind of the average person has been turned against populism over the past, well, even before Trump. Putin was accused of being a populist, and there's various so-called populist movements in Europe that have risen up over the past 4 or 5 years, But then Trump was thrown into that category as well. And yeah, populism is... What is populism? It's... How do they even describe it? It's one leader who kind of captivates a large percentage of the audience, of the population, and to whom they look as a as someone who will solve their problems, and it can turn into a cult of personality or something like that, but doesn't necessarily have to. But I just find it funny how people can have their heads turned against populism, and have had so many people have had ordinary people have had their heads turned against, or their minds turned against populism, when these same people complain all the time about there being so few politicians that they like enough to actually support or to vote for.
Yeah.
You know, that's more or less what populism is, where people really like one leader and give him their allegiance and their vote, and that's meant to be dangerous. And I can see how it's dangerous for the people in the established kind of system that you have in Washington D.C. or in other European capitals. But it's dangerous for them. But it's certainly not a bad thing for the population to have one person in the halls of power who actually cares about the population and who they resonate with, and see that he actually cares about them, like he's a man of the people, quote unquote. Problem all along for everybody in the Western world for the past 30, 40, 50 years has been that all these politicians, none of them are men of the people or women of the people. They're so detached from us that they can't relate to our lives anymore. So that's why you have so few people vote in Europe, in elections, in general elections in the Western world. I mean, generally speaking, at best, it's about 50% of the population actually bother to vote. Why does that 50% not bother to vote consistently? Because they feel totally disillusioned and disenfranchised by the political system. These people don't represent me at all. They're just doing their thing, and I'll just get on with my life anyway. And then someone comes along and attracts people again. Jeremy Corbyn was an example in the UK. I'm not saying I necessarily support Jeremy Corbyn, but he's an example of someone who was saying the right things to ordinary people in the UK and addressing their grievances, and seemed to be heartfelt in his claims and his intention to do something about that. And he got a massive amount of popular support for it. And he also was then identified by the establishment as a big problem, and they got rid of him. They got rid of him specifically by way of accusing him of being an anti-Semite.
Yeah.
Which is an easy slur these days, you know.
I get what you're saying, but by the description you just given, you've ironically just described Joe Biden as a populist.
How?
Because the turnout in the United States election officially in 2020 was the highest it has been since 1902 at 70-some%.
Yeah.
20% higher than the normal average, which is the modern average, say, post-60s, is 55% turnout. We're to believe it jumped 20% so that one populist could out-popularize, whatever their term is, another populist, which, of course, that's farcical because it speaks to the...
Joe Biden is a flash in the pan populist, and he can only be called a populist, or only got a populist vote because of Trump. Populist leaders are popular because they claim to give people what they want for the first time, actually address one of their grievances or give them something that they really want. And the people who voted for Joe Biden really, really wanted Trump gone. So he was populist. He got a populist or popular vote to get rid of Trump. That's all. Not for Joe Biden himself, because no one in their right mind would ever think that Joe Biden is a populist leader. You know, everybody knows and I think the vast majority of people who voted for Joe Biden don't expect anything good to come from him. They're just so happy that, at least they think, that all the bad things will go away now because Trump is gone. But of course they don't really have many examples of what those bad things are, apart from general terms like racism and sexism and stuff like that.
He lost that election though, right?
Joe Biden?
Yeah.
It's really hard to believe that Joe Biden could have won.
More votes than Obama in 2008.
Yeah. Well,
there's something else. I mean, do you remember? You remember the feel? I mean, that was genuine populism.
Obama, yeah.
When he was campaigning,
right?
He turns out to have not been a very much establishment guy, but hope and change.
Yeah,
it's vague, but people actually voted because they believed he's going to change things.
He's going to do something for the ordinary people of America, but he didn't really do anything different. Nothing really changed. In fact, a lot of things kind of went downhill a little bit with Obama, but certainly nothing changed dramatically. But
Senator Ted Cruz, was in the process of pointing out to his colleagues during that session, just before it was closed and they all fled and put on gas masks, 2 days ago, that he pointed out the most, I think there are a variety of polls, but one of them is, I think it's a Pew poll, and 17% of the Democrats poll said they didn't believe the election result.
Right.
So there are people, presumably they voted Democrat in the last election, and presumably they did so because they don't want Trump.
Right.
But they don't believe the election result.
Right, yeah. Well,
that's remarkable.
I think for most people, and this is a problem where you have what people actually believe, what the average person in their basic common sense believe, and which is true, versus what the media portrays to them and what the media tries to convince them, over what the media tries to convince everybody is the actual truth. I think a significant majority of people, obviously all of the Trump supporters, however many they are, probably more than Trump voters, probably more than than they admitted that he got. He got more votes. That's me alleging that it was probably a fraudulent election. And like you said, a significant number of Democrats just looked at it and said, it's unlikely he got Biden more votes than Obama, more votes than any president
ever
in American history. It just doesn't stand up to the scrutiny. And when I thought about it, about that idea of him getting that many votes and stuff, I was like, this 2020 election should probably, in reality, without any messing with the vote tallies or messing with the vote count, would have been a rerun, more or less, of 2016. There's no reason for 20% more or whatever, 20 million more or however many it was, people who traditionally don't vote to come out and vote against Trump. I know Trump's vote was increased as well, but that large increase in the turnout from the usual doesn't make any sense. Because, I mean, it's explained, they attempt to explain it by saying, well, that's all those people who wanted to get rid of Trump, right?
Yeah.
But the people in the American population any of them who are paying attention, who are interested, knew well before the 2016 election that they knew what Trump was. His whole grab him by the pussy tape and the allegations about Russia, about collusion, all that had already been made before the 2016 election in November. So people who really were shocked by that and wanted to make sure that this guy did not become president, you have to try and remember back to 2016 and just what a bad rap or what bad press Trump was getting all the way through the summer.
If you vote for him, you're voting for Nazism.
Nazism, everything. All the things they said afterwards in the 4 years of his administration, they had already said repeatedly over and over again. So there's no reason for anybody who believed that and thought this guy shouldn't be president would have voted in 2016. And then when they didn't and he won against Hillary Clinton in the following 4 years, anybody who had any doubts about Trump probably would have had those doubts assuaged, in the sense that they saw that he was accused repeatedly unfairly. These are people who are never Trumpers. This is the demographic I'm talking about here, is the people who generally don't vote. But you're saying came out in this election in November last year, came out and voted against him, right? These are people who are basically on the fence. They're not really committed one way or another. What did they see over the 4 years of Trump's, not having voted against him in 2016? What did they then see in the 4 years of his administration that would have made them come out en masse last November and decide this guy has to go? What did Trump do that was different, or that would have convinced anybody that weren't convinced in 2016, in the summer of 2016 up to the election then? What did he do then in the following 4 years that would have made those people absolutely convinced that by whatever means, fair or foul, this guy has to go, and get them all out, all the people who don't vote out to vote for him? I don't think there's anything that happened over those 4 years that would have convinced those people in that way. In fact, I think what they would have been observing from their generally impartial position was that Trump was getting a bad rap from the establishment. And if anything, it would have endeared him to them. Or would have, if they were going to vote in 2020, they would have voted for him.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was all there, basically, is what I'm saying, in 2016. All of the pro-Trumpers and anti-Trumpers were there in 2016, and they had their voice heard, or they had their say in the election. And there's no reason to explain or to expect that there would have been this massive turnout in 2020 to get rid of Trump. And that's the only way they explain that massive turnout. Ergo, there was something else going on.
Yeah. I suppose they might counter that by saying, well, something did happen between the two elections, the COVID and those riots.
How does that go against Trump? For the average person, remove the people who voted against him in 2016 and leave the people who traditionally don't vote in presidential elections. Because they're the ones who swung this election for Biden, supposedly, and gave him the greatest number of votes of any president in American history. What did they see through those 4 years, whether it be what Trump did or COVID or whatever, that made them say, Trump is the devil incarnate and we have to get out and, for the first time, for some of us, for the first time in our lives, vote against him?
What the media said.
Yeah, but these are people who are immune to the media because they didn't give a shit in 2016.
Are they immune, though?
Well, they got it all.
What they said to them was, these 50 cities that are burning all through last summer, or not so many all through the summer, but, you know, the BLM protests / riots and the craziness in some places. What they said was simply, this is Trump's America. You know, the association was hammered over and over. That
what they saw
the
was
end of our country with Trump. So remove him and we can go back to normality.
Right, but what a lot of people saw, despite what the media said, what the people saw was a bunch of Democrat politicians big-upping those Black Lives Matter riots and burning in several different cities and burning down shops and businesses and that chaos. They saw Democrat politicians, including Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, either saying nothing, not condemning it, or tacitly supporting it. That's what they saw on Twitter and social media and on the media, on the mainstream media. They saw that happening.
Yeah.
And they saw Trump condemn it repeatedly.
Yeah.
So that's another example of what I'm talking about. Not only did those on the fence, traditionally on the fence, don't vote people see Trump get a bad rap, an unfair treatment from the media and from the establishment, and accused of something that he was proven not to have done, but they also saw Joe Biden and his ilk basically promote and support the general idea of mobs burning and wrecking people's businesses and towns across America. And then you're going to tell me those people all came out and supported Joe Biden, voted for Joe Biden en masse, and gave him the greatest number of votes of any president in US history? Doesn't make any sense to me.
No. Sorry.
Again, you have to remember that the people we're talking about are not the diehard never Trumpers. It's the people who, in previous elections, generally don't vote. It's that extra 20% or 15% or whatever that came out and voted in this election in November. These are people, you have to, you know, it's important for people listening to this to get that into their head, to think about those people and what their mindset is, being people who never, generally don't vote, and who they would have come out after the past 4 years, who they would have come out and voted for, you know, having never voted before.
Yeah.
They don't have an ideology, is what I'm saying. They're not diehard pro one or other.
Yeah.
They're the most objective people in America in the sense that they're not identified, so they simply look at the facts, and if they're going to vote, they're going to vote one way or another. Right.
They're Thanksgiving, American football. They've got their basic interest, and when they're small world, their regular working week plus the things they like to do with friends and family at the weekend. When those, it's funny actually you mention ideology, because ideology in those 4 years was brought to them.
Right.
You had obviously the bend the knee thing, taking the knee at the football games.
Right.
That created a massive backlash to the point where people were burning the season tickets. They didn't want to go watch the football anymore. It spread to the NBA, other sports, other cultural. It went on and on and on. So ideology was brought to them.
Right.
They voted with their wallets and their actions and bums on seats. And then when it came to a formal vote, we're supposed to believe they all flipped that vote, metaphorically, into a real vote for the team that's been shoving the ideology down their throats for 4 years.
It doesn't make any
Sociologically, there's no way you can
justify it or explain it.
Yeah.
That it makes any sense.
Anyway, so let's go back to Capitol Hill. There's now, I mean, there were many claims.
Before, just to follow up on that point, put up that picture, Scotty, will you, of those 4 lovely women that I sent you. Or that one you just had up. Yeah, there was that one. Kamala Harris, this is all from, one of them's from a couple of years ago. Maxine Waters down the bottom left there is from a couple of years ago. But again, it was Black Lives Matter riots. The other 3 are from this summer. Kamala Harris, protesters are going to keep going, she said, and then that they should not let up. She said that to, I actually have the video of that, of her saying that to, what's his face? Funny comedian boy, Stephen Colbert. The other woman, I'm not sure who she is, the baldy woman, there needs to be unrest in the streets. What's her Supergran? What's her name? I just don't know why there aren't any uprisings all over the country. Maybe there will be. Nancy Pelosi, and then Maxine Waters telling people to harass Trump politicians and Trump supporting politicians, or whatever. So the point about this is
uprisings. I mean, she's not.
Well, you have the left.
And then 6 months later, like, oh my God, this was an insurrection and our darkest day. And
yeah, but the difference there is that the protests that they're supporting are protests that involve burning down of people's businesses in small town or big town America. It's very far from Capitol Hill, right? When Trump supporters arrive at their house, those 4 women's house, which is Capitol Hill, in a kind of abstract way, or in a
oh, they think they own it.
Yeah.
They
but then that's when they get really worked up about it,
Yeah.
because it's attacking the establishment, the seat, the so-called seat of democracy. So yeah, it's one rule for me and another rule for you, So there's no justification for it, really. I mean, objectively, if you're either against mob violence or you're not. You can't pick and choose mob violence because it's always portrayed or if you take that perspective, it's always a bad thing. The mob, the crowd, is always a destructive force. Doesn't matter which side it's on. So if you're against it, you're against it. Whenever you say I'm against it here but not against it there, well then you're just a disingenuous asshole and you should shut up and no one should believe you. People should automatically think that you're not on the level, and they shouldn't really believe anything you say ever.
And that's your dangers. I mean, that is what has been said. Those people are now completely. Do you see what's just happened here? They won the election, okay, so they won the presidency. After what just happened in Georgia's runoff Senate election, they now have Democrats have a majority in the Senate.
Yeah,
they have a majority in the House.
Right.
The only place they don't is the Supreme Court, but we've just seen them rule.
Yeah, they don't care. They'll step away. They'll do a Homer Simpson retreat into the hedge.
Yeah.
If anything big comes up.
It's kind of scary for Americans.
Yep.
Should they be scared, though? I mean,
Americans?
should Americans be more scared of these guys having full control of the levers of power in the country? Or should they be more scared of any kind of serious, beyond a screaming, media headlines version that we saw 2 days ago, any kind of serious physical, militant revolution?
From Trump supporters?
Yeah.
No, well, they're talking about that, obviously, that they're going to keep it going until Inauguration Day. CNN is talking about another anti-Trump media is talking about secret plans that they've heard about or uncovered about right-wing extremists planning something for Inauguration Day or just before Inauguration Day.
I thought Biden wasn't going to have an event because COVID.
No, he is. Just nobody's allowed to go.
Right.
He'll be there to stumble and fumble and his way through the oath to be nominated president. Like that's going to be that'll be one to watch just for that to try and to listen to him try and actually repeat what the guy
irony
does.
of irony is 4 years ago they mocked Trump because he exaggerated how many people came to Washington, a town that hates him, I presume, even then, to see his inauguration, and that he bigged it up and inflated the numbers. But 4 years later, Biden might actually have no one.
Right, because COVID.
Or because revolution, whichever.
Or because, both, revolution and COVID, COVID revolution.
You know, there have been rumors about... maybe we should get back to it and clarify it, because I'm not sure what we said in the end, one way or the other. The Capitol Hill storming.
No, it didn't change anything. Trump was not going to win.
It didn't change it, but what was it specifically? Because beyond rumors, there are now a couple of verified guys who are known to have been BLM activists and or Antifa, whichever of the two, involved in the riots from last summer, who were present inside that building that day. Yeah. Are we... And of course you have the stuff about planted bombs. There could be false reports, but then there's a cop who was quoted as saying, no, I saw them. There were explosive devices in the building. Yeah.
Well, who planted them?
Who plants them? Because obviously Trump supporters have no history of going there.
No. I could...
But it's also plausible because if it's supposedly a revolution, this is the thing where it's you got to get your head around several things at once. There were Trump supporters who were there, who really believed they were there, quote, as one of them said, for the revolution.
Naive people, but
naive.
But
was this Trump trying to do a political stunt, but his political stunt was co-opted cleverly on the day or something by his opponents? Pretty
much, yeah. I mean, he should have been aware. He should not have encouraged those people, knowing that there was a good chance that there would have been some kind of agent provocateurs within that large number of people. He should not have sent them anywhere near the Capitol building. He should not have encouraged them to go, and he should have told them not to go anywhere near the Capitol building. Not because he didn't want his supporters to be there. He would have liked that's what he said. He wanted them to go there. When he did tell them to go, he wanted them to go to raise their voices and let the people inside know that you're supporting them and objecting to the vote results. But he should have realised that, no, err on the side of caution here, bad idea. You don't know who's among that crowd, and you don't know what they're going to do at the Capitol building and how that could be really bad. The optics on that could be super bad for you, and it could end up to you being impeached right before in their last 2 weeks of your presidency. You want that? Well, don't even bother.
Yeah, is that on the cards now? That's a serious possibility. Yeah.
But they're running with that, like they're exploiting the hell out of what happened on Wednesday in the Capitol. They're using it because those people are really, really, really angry at Trump. For no good reason. No good reason. They have a reason, but it's not a good reason. The establishment types really, really don't like him, don't like what he stands for, don't like his populism. It's not that is bad for the country or anything like that. It's just that the Washington establishment, don't like populism and don't like Trump's particular brand of politics, and they want to bury him. And the opportunity has...
As a warning to anyone considering it in the future. As
a precedent, and for Trump himself, that... In the event that he might, try and think about making a comeback if they go through the impeachment, and there's certainly better chance than the first time they tried to impeach him. They did impeach him, but he wasn't convicted. There's a better chance that they'll be successful, that he'll be convicted this time because of what happened on Wednesday. And if that happens, they could put in their articles, or they could put conditions or provisions of the impeachment that he's not allowed to run for public office again in his lifetime. So that's not good. Like that the shit that happened at the Capitol building is not worth that. It was stupid in that respect. But again, you can't control a mob, and the mob was leveraged by people. I think by people who were against Trump. They leveraged his mob at a very particular, very crucial, special moment, special time,
super
in
effective.
A special place.
Internationally, media had the headlines, and the faux shock everywhere was like, it's gas because, it makes me think of two. There was one similar incident that took place in Germany last year. There was a massive anti-COVID protest anti-lockdown protest in Berlin, and a small group broke off from the procession to as the media headlines screamed the next day, stormed the Reichstag,
Right.
which of course invokes Nazi Germany and stuff. It wasn't that at all. They didn't even get inside the building. They were just waving their flags. Among them were actually people waving Q-type paraphernalia, Q flags and stuff, which is interesting. But of course, it was spun as, this is a far-right, neo-Nazi type attempted coup takeover. It's very similar. I laughed at the time, but it's interesting to see the very same script play out less than a year later in the United States, and much more effectively. I have to hand it to them. It was propaganda-wise. They were handed a gift by Trump, unintentionally on his part. That was it was a mistake.
Yeah.
But the other thing it makes me think of, you're saying Trump should have known better. I hear you. But here's the thing. The 20th century and into the 21st century is littered with iconic images drilled into everyone's face the world over, generations upon generations now, that the pinnacle of democracy, in fact, its purest form in which it can be founded, is when the people storm the parliament of the country and demand change. And that's been really effective. They haven't always worked. The dictator du jour has often held out or managed to squash the protests and stuff. But it's resulted in so many regime change operations with CIA support and
but
Western media
that's
money.
what I said at the beginning of the show, that
that's the template.
The coup, they're talking about a coup in Washington on Capitol Hill on Wednesday. And, I've seen evidence of a lot of coups and how they played out and stuff. Right. And that was not a coup, you know what I mean? Yeah. Although that is how... that the optics do look like a coup. It just didn't happen.
That's how they start, but the media is on your side for starters.
Well, exactly, yeah. It's a coup, and when America talks about coups like that happening, starting like that and playing out like that, and then ending up in the overthrow of the established government and a new government, etc. When that happens in other countries, and when it's being supported by the CIA, then the Western press is loving up on it all over the place. It's just like, so that can happen in other countries, and it's awesome, but it can't happen in America. It's the purest form of the democratic will or the democratic drive in other countries. In America, definitely not. Even though in this situation it actually was. It was a very American version of it, which was kind of like a fast food version in a certain sense. It was in and out fairly quickly and still left a bit hungry afterwards and not feeling very nutritionally fulfilled. But that's as far as it gets in the USA. Because
we shouldn't mock or laugh. Maybe this is just the beginning of, because these people have nowhere else to go.
Is the band going to make it?
They've been shut out at every venue.
Well, what about
legal recourse? Where does their grievance go?
But Q and friends of Q were in the Capitol building with those guys, and they stole Nancy Pelosi's laptop.
I heard this.
Yeah. Absolutely. I have it from an authoritative source. Q's a friend of mine, and he sent me an email saying that, they have Nancy Pelosi's laptop, and you will not believe what's on Nancy Pelosi's
Tell us, Joe. What did they find?
No, I can't even say it. It's disgusting. It's terrible. It's horrible stuff. It's just depraved. It's all the things that you imagine and worse. And it's going to be on, it's going to be released one of these days. Just keep waiting. Any day now.
So it's a hell of an end to Trump's.
Yeah. Although, just getting back to what you were saying, yes, I have sympathy for it, even though I say it was a bad idea for him to encourage people to go to the Capitol Hill. And look, the optics were really bad, and it's been exploited and used, and it may end up in his impeachment, and it's a really bad end to a very difficult presidency where he was under attack for the most of the time that he was there. And it's a really ignominious end in a certain sense if they end up impeaching him and preventing him from running for public office again. But having said all that, I'm in no position to, given the context in which all of this happened, I don't find myself in a position where I could really stand by criticizing him or anybody else involved with him for how it all played out, because he was up against a behemoth in terms of that Washington establishment, and they had, like Chuck Schumer said, 6 ways from Sunday to get back at him and to screw him over and to bury him in the dirt, and he stood up against it for 4 years. And even the bit at the end, even though it looks bad, and obviously him and his followers get a lot of bad press and get called, insurrectionists and coup plotters and white extremists and terrorists, domestic terrorists. They're being called. Yeah, maybe that was worth it as well, in a certain sense. I don't know. It's up to Trump to decide whether it was worth it, because it's affects him personally. Maybe it was worth it for just to try and blow the whole thing a bit wider open, if you know what I mean, to put a few more cracks in the establishment narrative of how everything is wonderful on the left and everything's evil on the right, and when they and to expose their hypocrisy, which is obviously on full display when they talk about having to unite the nation. Let's bring everybody together again, but they repeatedly, over and over again, divide people down the line of left and right and call the right extremists and terrorists, and the left are wonderful demonstrators for democracy and equality and equal rights for everybody, and blah blah blah. Biden commenting what happened on the 6th and Capitol Hill even said he likened Ted Cruz and your other guy who was prominent in the objections against the electoral college votes. He likened them to them and Trump to Goebbels. He referenced the big lie. He said, there's Goebbels and this big lie. Well, that's pretty much what these people are doing. So he basically called them Nazis. So on one side of his mouth, he's saying, we've got to bring the country back together again, and then he's calling the political representatives of half of the country Nazis. So how can you take any of those people seriously,
Well, you do, because...
Well, take them seriously in that they're evil bastards.
Dangerous.
They're dangerous, crazy nut jobs, but take them seriously in what they say. You're joking.
I think I don't know. People, take someone like Lindsey Graham, for example. Trump supporters are pissed at him right now. He is definitely the career politician type. Yeah. He's definitely one of them. But he at least had enough of a common sense in him to acknowledge Trump's political support because of his popular support, and to at least keep up appearances with trying to compromise, make deals in the background, try and get Trump to curb some of his enthusiasm, and vice versa, to try and get some of his policy goals in place. I'm on the verge of saying I have sympathy for him. Maybe I shouldn't. I don't know. It's these people. Well, these people are going to be the authors of their own destruction.
Yeah. There's 124 members of Congress who stood up and stood with Trump in objecting to the signing on the dotted line, and their names are known.
They're, yes, in the House.
Right, and
far fewer in the Senate.
10 or 11 in Congress, or in the Senate.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's quite a lot in the lower house in Congress, yeah, it's not all lost, but so there's some decent people still willing to put their names on the line and their reputations on the line, but they're not. You look at the names and you realize they're not people with any significant power or influence in Washington D.C.
I want to show something here. This is footage of Lindsey Graham leaving D.C. along with the airport's full of people who are themselves returning home. I presume the Trump supporters who went out to the rally. Let's go ahead and listen to this.
You traitor! You traitor! You're a traitor! You're a traitor! Lindsey Graham, you are a traitor to the country! You know it was rigged! You know it was rigged! You know it was rigged! You garbage human being! It's gonna be like this forever, wherever you go for the rest of your life! Audit the vote! Audit the vote!
I think we got the point.
Audit the vote.
10.6 million views. This isn't going to go away. They might have all the power. They might have won. But what have they won? I mean, they've got a tiger by the tail now. Like, I don't know. I don't think... You got to be careful what you say, because you don't want to encourage people to choose one way or the other.
No.
It's completely understandable that some would want to, they would say, well, there's no legal recourse. History shows us that the only recourse is militaristic.
Mm-hmm.
I'm entirely justified in doing so.
Yeah.
Get out of my way or join me. So something like that's going to happen in some form or another, which isn't for me to big up or to... I hope I'm not being fancy. I don't mean to sound like I'm being fanciful in wanting that to happen. And then, of course, well, we've seen what they shot one girl in the neck, unarmed, of course. They shot her dead when she was inside the building.
Yeah.
What do people with guns do when they come up against? They'll shoot you, you know.
Yeah.
So you'll be armed. You say we're Americans, we're armed. But then it's all in. You know, you're talking about civil war.
Yeah.
How likely is that? At the moment, I think we've discussed this earlier and we agreed it's unlikely, in part because we're not sure really how serious most Americans are about this yet. There's a very childlike naivety to them still. The ones who attended and went to the Capitol seemed to be shocked that things didn't go their way, politically, in terms of a result during that session, and then also in terms of how they ended up looking bad, and Trump called them back, and they went home like, well, what? But we were here for the revolution.
Well,
why was it stopped? You know?
Yeah, I don't think a lot of them were there. I think I would give credit to a lot of them that they were just there to
protest,
to voice their in a normal way that people, you know, voice their concerns, whatever, and turn up to support the you know, the policies or the whatever that they support. But there's a small group of them that fit that profile of being naive idiots. You know what I mean? In a certain sense, who cause trouble and cause problems for other people by taking, you know, by not understanding the complexity of the situation and charging ahead. And they're, you know, look, that guy with the horns and others dressed up in kind of caveman clothes and stuff, and you know, LARPing around in Congress and taking selfies and sitting in Nancy Pelosi's chair and stuff and pretending to make phone calls. I mean, you know, they're not the kind of people you want representing you. You know what I mean? But of course, they're the kind of people that the media loves to see as representatives, you know, so they can oversimplify and present the situation in black and white terms to the population, you know. So, yeah, it's pretty bad. But I would like to think that that you know, to whatever extent, and we'll just say this for YouTube, to whatever extent, we don't know, to whatever extent that the election was that there was some vote rigging in the election. Even though it wasn't proven, right? There's, you know, it still has never been decided by a competent authority whether or not there was any rigging of during the election. But if in the case that occurred, I would like to think that the people who went along with it, which is most of the establishment, most of the, you know, the body politic, went along with it and got rid of Trump because they decided that getting rid of Trump was more important than you know, the democratic process or a fair electoral process, because it was, you know, he was a danger. Of course, you know, we've already said that we think he was seen as a danger to the establishment. They didn't like him on ideological grounds, but also from a population point of view. There's so many people who have been turned against Trump that if Trump got another term, you would have large and destructive protests ongoing for a long period of time. Probably you would have had in the US. That would have been a much worse scenario than what we've seen as a result of Trump losing. And they made that accurate, you know, assessment of the situation, and we saw that it is an accurate assessment of the situation. We see that the police at Capitol Hill the other day made the same assessment. It's common knowledge that Trump supporters don't go feral and wreck and burn and destroy when they don't get what they want. So if you're going to piss someone off, whereas the Black Lives Matter Antifa type people do, at least there's a big contingent of them that do, and they have the potential to create much more destruction, the will to create much more destruction. So if you're going to make a choice between those two, well then, or who to piss off piss off the ones that don't go as mad whenever they get pissed off. So that could be a reason for, in their minds, or to justify getting rid of Trump by fair means or foul. It doesn't matter. It's for the good of the country, because the country is in such a state. The society and the popular mind is so divided, and you have that they would not be able to tolerate, a certain big section of them would not be able to tolerate a second Trump term. So it's better that he goes.
Yeah, if only. Yeah, that makes some kind of sense. If they see groups of people in those terms, it makes sense.
I think some of them might actually have used that to explain it to themselves,
right?
To justify it themselves.
There's a portion of this country that's just absolutely nuts.
Yeah,
they are a threat. We acknowledge what Trump's saying about them is true,
right?
But given that that's the case, we actually need to pacify them.
And we have to get rid of Trump. We have to, accept that if they know that there's vote rigging going on, they'll say, well, we're not going to stand up and make a fuss about it, because the end result is that it means that Trump is gone, and that's ultimately good for the country. Whether or not it's good for the country, I have serious doubts, because I don't think Trump was bad for the country, and I don't think him being removed in the way that he was removed is good for the country. I think it's much worse. So in fact, my projection or assumption of their understanding of the situation, I think the reality is exactly the opposite. But I'm allowing for them to believe that, to think that, because it seems plausible enough. But I think in reality it's actually the opposite. That the events of the past few weeks, and over all of Trump's presidency and over the past few weeks and months, and the way they've ended are going to have pretty significantly negative repercussions down the line for America in a general sense. But, I think that's the case for a lot of places in the world, because the way things seem to be going. It's certainly not looking, the picture isn't very rosy these days, hasn't been this past year. Obviously I'm talking about COVID, but we don't have time to get into COVID today. So
another show.
We'll keep COVID for next time.
Joe has lots to say about the COVID.
Yes, I do. An awful lot. No, I don't.
You do.
I've summed it up. I can sum it up in a few words, but I'll keep that for later.
Okay, we will. All right, so until then.
Yeah, we'll drop it there. And thanks for listening and watching and whatever. And like and subscribe. And
like and share this if you can. There's a good chance this won't be on YouTube much longer. Yeah. But we're going to find an alternative place to post our videos. So
absolutely.
In the meantime, share it around if you can. And thanks for watching.